A wealthy father observes a black server permit his disabled son to guide a dance, and subsequently alters her destiny permanently. The hush that descended upon Kingsley's, Manhattan's most prestigious dining establishment, felt almost tangible. Discussions halted, silverware suspended mid-motion, and countless gazes focused on the narrow area between dining tables. 10-year-old Lucas Montgomery trembled noticeably. His limbs, confined within metallic supports, quivered as he extended his arm toward Diana Johnson, the establishment's sole black server. The live pianist had just commenced a gentle tune, and the child's sudden urge to invite someone to dance emerged unexpectedly. "Sir, manage your child." Manager Thornton's crisp voice pierced the quietness. "That behavior is unacceptable. This establishment is not a ballroom, and our staff members are not present to amuse youngsters." Richard Montgomery, proprietor of Montgomery Investments and among the nation's wealthiest individuals, gulped deeply. This marked the first occasion he had brought Lucas to dine publicly since the incident that had partially immobilized his legs 2 years prior. An error he would not make again. "Lucas, be seated." The command came quietly but decisively. Diana remained still, her attention moving between the manager, the millionaire, and the child whose hand remained extended in the air. During her 5 years of employment there, she had mastered becoming unnoticed, particularly by patrons like Montgomery. "Mr. Thornton, I'm departing. My work period has concluded." Her tone remained composed as she removed her apron and set it upon the serving tray. Then, to everyone's astonishment, she beamed at Lucas and accepted his hand. "I cannot dance while wearing an apron." Richard rose suddenly. "What are your intentions?" Diana met his stare. "I'm responding to an invitation, sir." Before anyone could object, Lucas took an uncertain step forward. His foot dragged painfully along the floor, and his metallic braces produced a harsh sound. However, Diana made no attempt to direct him or rush him. She merely matched her tempo to his. "She'll face termination tomorrow," murmured a woman at the adjacent table. Richard observed, frozen. A sudden recollection struck him. Elizabeth, his deceased wife, dancing with Lucas in their living room. "It's not about flawlessness," she had stated. "It's about connection." As Diana matched Lucas's awkward steps, something shifted in the boy's expression. Terror transformed into focused determination. Embarrassment gave way to timid confidence. For the first time since the incident, he wasn't being directed, assisted, or corrected. He was leading. "Mr. Montgomery," the manager's voice broke his concentration. "I can guarantee this will never occur again. She will receive appropriate punishment." Richard remained silent. The entire restaurant appeared to await his response. After all, a person of his influence could destroy anyone's career with a single utterance. Staff members ceased their activities. Other patrons observed with ghoulish fascination. Lucas's smile, however, was the sole sound that resonated in his thoughts. Diana guided the boy back to their table after 3 dance steps. "Thank you for inviting me," she said politely as though addressing an adult. "It was my privilege." When she turned to depart, Richard halted her. "Wait." His voice sounded altered, almost foreign to himself. "What is your complete name?" "Diana Johnson, sir." Richard nodded slowly. "Diana Johnson," he repeated as if committing it to memory. Then he retrieved a card from his jacket and extended it to her. "My office. Tomorrow at 10 a.m. The entire restaurant held its breath. Diana accepted the card without displaying emotion, though her hand shook slightly. "Father," Lucas called as she walked away. "Why did you do that?" The inquiry lingered in the air like an accusation. Richard looked at his son and momentarily saw not merely the child Elizabeth had entrusted to his care, but a complete human being whose desires and requirements he had systematically disregarded for 2 years. As dinner continued in uncomfortable silence, no one observed Diana's expression before she departed. Not one of fear or surrender, but of calm resolve that contrasted with a tempest brewing in Richard Montgomery's eyes. If this narrative about dignity and transformation is already moving your heart, don't forget to subscribe to follow how a simple act of respect can ignite a quiet revolution capable of transforming lives permanently. The entrance hall of Montgomery Tower gleamed with its glass and marble surfaces, reflecting the morning sunshine. Diana Johnson immediately felt misplaced in her finest attire, a navy blue skirt and white blouse purchased on sale. The individuals passing by her wore garments that likely cost more than her monthly housing payment. Diana Johnson to see Mr. Montgomery, she informed the receptionist, who scrutinized her with a clinical stare before placing a call. 18th floor, Miss Winters will meet you. In the elevator, Diana took a deep breath, clutching her weathered purse against her chest. It wasn't terror she experienced. It was a quiet resolve that came from having confronted worse. Much worse. Miss Winters was a woman in her 40s with a keen gaze and flawless posture. Mr. Montgomery is in a conference call. Please accompany me. As she walked through the mirrored corridors, Diana felt the inquisitive stares of the employees. A black woman being escorted through the executive offices was rare enough to generate speculation. He had you dismissed, didn't he? Winters asked suddenly when they were alone in a waiting area. It occurs, influential clients telephone, and people like you lose their employment. People like me? You understand what I mean? Winters adjusted her spectacles. Employees who don't understand their position? Diana smiled, not with amusement. And where precisely would that be? Before Winters could respond, her telephone rang. He'll meet with you now. Richard Montgomery's office occupied half the floor. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, Manhattan appeared like a distant recreation area. The man stood, gazing out at the city as though it were his personal domain. Mr. Montgomery, Diana greeted him formally. Richard turned, his face a mask of controlled composure. Miss Johnson, thank you for coming. He indicated a chair. Please. The silence that ensued was deliberate, a strategy Diana recognized immediately. It was the type of silence designed to make anxious people speak excessively, incriminate themselves. Do you have credentials? Richard finally inquired. Pardon me? Education, university. Diana maintained her steady gaze. Bachelor's degree in child development from New York University. Incomplete master's degree in special education. Something flickered across Richard's face. Surprise, perhaps. And you work as a server. I work 3 positions, actually. The restaurant, a bookstore on weekends, and as a tutor when I can secure students. Richard moved to his desk, retrieving a folder. I conducted some research on you, Miss Johnson. I wanted to understand who the person was who, he hesitated, danced with my son. He opened the folder, revealing printed photographs of a community center. Freedom Steps. You established this 6 years ago. Diana straightened in her chair. I co-established it with my sister Zoe. A dance program for children with physical disabilities. Richard leafed through some documents, which is now facing closure due to insufficient funding. Diana showed no surprise. Naturally, he would discover all of this within 24 hours. I didn't come here to request money from you, Mr. Montgomery. Then why did you come? Because you invited me. Richard chuckled softly, a mirthless sound. Fair point. He stood again, restless. I want you to work for me. Diana blinked, genuinely startled. As a server in your residence? Richard's face hardened. As a therapeutic companion for Lucas. His son's name seemed difficult for him to utter. Diana noticed how his eyes momentarily shifted to a photograph on the desk. A smiling woman holding an infant. I have the finest specialists in the nation, Richard continued. Physical therapists, neurologists, psychologists. But what you accomplished yesterday, he paused as if the words betrayed him. It was simply a dance, Mr. Montgomery. It was the first time I've witnessed him smile since the incident. The admission was painful. I don't want a dancer for my son. I want someone who can do what you did. Follow, not lead. Diana studied the man before her. Beneath the facade of power and control, she saw what others might not. A desperate, lost father. I can pay you 5 times your current earnings. Diana stood up. No. Richard looked shocked, like someone unaccustomed to hearing that word. I don't work for people who see only my race or my social status before they see my capabilities, she explained calmly. And I certainly don't work for people who attempt to purchase solutions to emotional problems. Richard's face flushed. You're declining an offer that would resolve your financial difficulties? Out of pride? Out of dignity, Diana corrected. And because your son deserves more than someone hired to pretend to care. She walked to the door, then paused. Lucas doesn't need more experts. He needs space to guide his own life. You don't know my son? No, Diana agreed. But I know people like him. People whose physical limitations are insignificant compared to the invisible prisons we construct around them. She took a card from her purse and placed it on the desk. Freedom Steps. Classes on Tuesdays and Thursdays, 4 p.m. If you'd like to bring Lucas, the first session is complimentary. As Diana departed, she passed Winters, who had obviously been eavesdropping behind the door. You just declined an offer from Richard Montgomery, she whispered incredulously. Are you insane? Diana smiled. Perhaps, but I'd rather be insane than be property. The following Wednesday, Diana was at the reception desk of the community center when Zoe, her sister and co-founder of the project, came rushing up. There's a Bentley parked outside, she whispered, nervously adjusting her hijab. And you won't believe who's inside. Through the window, Diana saw the luxurious vehicle. Lucas was in the rear seat, looking anxiously out the window. Richard remained in the driver's seat, his hands still on the steering wheel, as if fighting an internal struggle. He's not entering, Zoe predicted. Men like him don't visit places like this. Diana smiled, remembering Lucas's expression during those brief moments of dancing. Don't underestimate the power of a determined son. As they watched, the car door opened. Lucas emerged slowly, adjusting his equipment. Then, to everyone's surprise, Richard emerged too. The billionaire looked out of place in his casual trousers and sweater, an obvious attempt to dress less formally, but still radiating privilege. I told you he'd come, Diana murmured, more to herself. Zoe stared at her. What did you do? Diana didn't answer, but her eyes sparkled with a secret that not even her sister fully understood. In her tiny apartment in the Bronx, hidden beneath her bed, was a notebook filled with observations about children like Lucas and men like Richard Montgomery. Years of observation, research, and a plan that had begun with a simple acceptance of an invitation to dance. What Richard Montgomery didn't know, what he couldn't imagine in his world of glass towers and endless bank accounts, was that Diana Johnson wasn't merely a server who had agreed to dance with his son. She was a woman with a purpose, and his empire of isolation and privilege was about to face its greatest challenge, the simple truth that some of life's greatest lessons cannot be purchased. They must be experienced. Freedom Steps operated from an old community warehouse. Handmade signs decorated the walls with phrases like, your rhythm, your rules, and every move matters. When Richard and Lucas entered, children with various types of mobility devices practiced free movements to the sound of a gentle beat. Mr. Montgomery, Diana approached, wearing simple clothes with the program logo. Welcome. Lucas watched the children in wonder. A girl in a wheelchair spun in precise circles, while a boy with a prosthetic leg created a sequence of steps. It appears chaotic, Richard commented, visibly uncomfortable. There is structure, Diana replied. It's just not the one you recognize. She turned to Lucas. Would you like to participate? The boy nodded enthusiastically but looked at his father, hesitant. Go ahead, Richard said tensely. I'll be right here. As Diana guided Lucas to the group, Zoe approached Richard and offered him a chair. The first day is always the most difficult, she commented, for the parents, not the children. This isn't therapy, Richard argued. I hired the best rehabilitation specialists. And how has that been working for Lucas? Zoe asked gently. The studio door opened. An elderly woman entered, leaning on an ornate cane. She had gray hair and elegant braids and a commanding presence. Doctor? Elaine Mercer, Zoe whispered, neuroscientist specializing in brain plasticity, retired from Harvard. The woman greeted several children before noticing Richard. Mr. Montgomery, you've rejected my research proposal 3 times in the past 2 years. Dr. Mercer, I didn't expect to encounter you here. I oversee the research program, she explained. We're studying how non-directive approaches to movement affect neural reconfiguration in children with motor challenges. Research, Richard frowned. I thought this was just a community dance class. Diana returned, leaving Lucas exploring movements with another child. Freedom Steps is a pilot motor rehabilitation program based on the theory of movement autonomy, she explained. We integrate adaptive dance with neuroscientific principles. Why do you work as a server if you lead a research program? Because we don't have adequate funding yet, and because people like you rejected us 3 times. The realization dawned. You were Dr. Mercer's assistant on the proposals. Co-author, Dr. Mercer corrected. Diana has an incomplete master's degree because she had to leave college to care for her sister. But her theoretical work is groundbreaking. You knew who I was at the restaurant, Richard concluded. From the moment you entered, Diana confirmed. And when Lucas stood up to dance, I recognized the opportunity to demonstrate, not explain. Was it orchestrated? The dance? Absolutely not. Lucas chose to stand up. I chose to follow. A group of reporters entered the studio. Richard immediately tensed. What's this? Part 2 of the plan. Diana smiled slightly. Zoe showed Richard a newly published article. Revolutionary motor rehabilitation methodology shows promising results. We published our initial results today, Dr. Mercer explained, and we invited the press. You used my son for a public relations stunt? Richard's voice was pure ice. Diana led him into a side room where photographs of dozens of children adorned the walls, each with handwritten progress statistics. On the final wall was an empty frame. What's that? He asked. Our future. The complete rehabilitation center we could build if we had the resources. 500 children annually instead of 50. You orchestrated all this, Richard muttered. The dance, the meeting, bringing me here on press day. I saw an opportunity and took it. 4 months ago, when you canceled our meeting without reading the proposal, I promised myself I'd find a way. Diana, Zoe interrupted. It's Lucas. They rushed back. Lucas was in the center of the room, surrounded by other children. Someone had turned off the music, and everyone watched in silence. The boy had removed one of his braces and was trying to balance on just one support. Lucas! Richard started forward, but Diana stopped him. Wait, she whispered. Watch. Lucas took a deep breath, focused. Then, to everyone's amazement, especially his father's, he took a complete step without full support. It was small, shaky, but entirely his own. The children cheered. Camera flashes went off. Richard's face, usually composed and unreadable, was now exposed, with unshed tears glistening in his eyes. That's why we created Freedom Steps, Diana said softly. It's not about perfect steps. It's about first steps on your own. Richard watched his son, not as a problem to be managed, but as a complete person discovering his own strength. This could have been accomplished without manipulating me, he said finally. It could have been if you had answered our calls or read our proposals 3 times. The reporters noticed Richard. A murmur grew as Lucas, oblivious to the tension, continued practicing his new step with an expression of pure concentration. Richard Montgomery was cornered. Before him lay 2 options: withdraw in anger, confirming to the press his reputation as cold and calculating, or embrace the moment his son had created. Between the power he had always wielded and the freedom his son needed, Richard found himself in unfamiliar territory, one where neither his money nor his influence defined the next step. The man who controlled every aspect of his life now faced a choice that no amount of wealth could buy. His gaze shifted between his smiling son and the reporters waiting for his reaction. Humility was not a virtue in his vocabulary, but as he saw the transformation on Lucas's face, something inside him began to break. The orchestra of power and privilege he was accustomed to now played a different tune, and he had to decide, would he continue conducting or would he learn to follow? Richard Montgomery faced the reporters waiting for his reaction. His son had just taken a step on his own in front of the cameras, and Diana Johnson had skillfully led him to this impossible moment. Mr. Montgomery, a reporter approached, could you comment on your presence at Freedom Steps today? Is it true that your foundation rejected funding this program 3 times? Richard glanced at Lucas, who was still practicing his new step, oblivious to the political tension. Then to everyone's surprise, especially Diana's, he smiled. You know what's hardest for someone in my position? Richard addressed the reporter, but spoke loudly enough for everyone to hear. Admitting when we're wrong. A stunned silence filled the room. The Montgomery Foundation is pleased to announce a commitment to fully fund Freedom Steps for the next 5 years and to build a permanent rehabilitation center based on the methodology developed by Dr. Mercer and Ms. Johnson. Camera flashes exploded. Zoe let out a cry of surprise. On one condition, he added, watching Diana tense up, that Ms. Johnson retain complete autonomy over the program and its methodology. No corporate interference. 3 months later, bulldozers were clearing the ground for the new Freedom Steps Rehabilitation Center. The project wasn't the most luxurious the Montgomery Foundation had ever funded, but it was the most innovative, with every space designed with direct input from the children and their families. Diana supervised the construction frequently, but never alone. Lucas showed up regularly, sometimes bringing other children with him, and to the staff's continued surprise, Richard Montgomery also showed up, silently observing the progress. I never thought you'd actually attend board meetings, Diana commented one afternoon as they reviewed the plans. I never thought I'd have to study neuroplasticity at 50, Richard replied, rubbing his tired eyes. In front of him was a scientific article marked with post-it notes. But here we are. Diana looked at the man curiously. Is this part of your public penance, or do you genuinely care? Lucas asked to have his second brace removed last week. I know. He told me. His previous physical therapist said that would be impossible for at least 2 years. Diana smiled. But you dismissed her, remember? Because you told me she was wrong. And she was. Diana pointed to a photograph of Lucas balancing with only one crutch. He's progressing faster than any traditional medical prediction. Why did you never accept my apology? Richard asked suddenly. Because you never apologized. You redirected resources, changed policies, funded our program. That's not an apology. It's compensation. Richard nodded slowly. Fair again. At the opening ceremony 6 months later, the contrast with that night in the restaurant couldn't have been greater. The huge adaptive space was filled with children with various types of mobility devices, all moving freely. In the center of the main hall, Lucas, now wearing only a lightweight brace on his left leg, led a small choreographed routine with 3 other children. His movements were still limited, but they flowed with a confidence no doctor had predicted. Richard watched from a distance, not interfering. He doesn't need you to hold him anymore, Diana said, approaching quietly. No, Richard agreed, but he still needs me to be present. Crucial difference. Richard turned to face her. Thank you, he said simply. For what exactly? For teaching me to follow. A reporter approached. Mr. Montgomery, how does it feel to see your son's progress? Richard looked at Lucas, who was now helping a younger girl find her balance. Proud. Not of what he's overcome, but of what he's created for others. And what's been the biggest lesson you've learned on this journey? Richard Montgomery, the man who had once been known only for his financial empire, looked directly into the camera. That true leaders aren't those who guide others down the path they believe is right, but those who have the courage to follow when someone shows them a better way. A year later, the Freedom Steps program expanded to 3 new cities. Diana received the Pediatric Rehabilitation Innovation Award, and her methodology began to be implemented in hospitals across the country. Lucas, now using only a light cane on difficult days, enrolled in regular school and became a youth spokesperson for the program, inspiring other children to find their own pace. And Richard learned the hardest and most valuable lesson of all. That true power does not lie in controlling every move, but in knowing when it is time to take a step back and let others lead the way. In a world where powerful people rarely change their perspectives, and where those without power often remain in the shadows, the story of Richard, Diana, and Lucas reminds us that true transformation occurs when we cross the invisible boundaries that separate us. When a billionaire learns from a server, when a father follows in his son's footsteps. If this story about how a simple gesture of dignity changed lives forever touched your heart, be sure to subscribe, because we believe that the most profound revolutions don't start with grand manifestos or billion-dollar fortunes. They start when someone has the courage to take an authentic first step, and someone else has the wisdom to follow.